Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book to Film. And this week is, been a bit of a hiatus on this, is The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, written by R.A. Dick, that was a pseudonym. Her real name was Josephine Leslie, and it was written or published in 1945. And the 1947 20th Century Fox film with Rex Harrison and Gene Tierney, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. And as I say, if I didn't say 1947. And as I said, the book was published in 1945, and it's under a pseudonym. Josephine Leslie was the writer, but she wanted a more sort of masculine name to it because it's not quite a female sort of romance type thing. And as the title says, there's a ghost in it, or is there? There's a bit. It's the way it's written is kind of interesting. It's a woman, Lucy Muir, Mrs. Muir. She has sort of lived a sheltered life. Um, she lived in a country with her father, and her father wanted to have an extension to his library, so hired a young architect, and she fell in love with him, sort of. They married, had two children, Anne and Cyril. But when the book opens, he had recently died, and she'd been living with her in-laws, her sister-in-law and her mother-in-law. But she feels quite stifled there, and she wants some freedom. She wants to move to the seaside. So she decides on location to move to, and she goes down and to real estate agents and asks about a house or houses available. And there's one called Gall Cottage that is quite reasonable. It's £52 a year, and she's interested to look at that, but the realtor agent doesn't want her. He's saying, "Oh, this won't do for you." He knows better, and but she's sort of sticking to her guns. She's in some ways naive and subservient. Of the time, it's set at the turn of the 20th century, the early 20th century, but she insists on seeing this house, and she falls in love with it. And the reason why it's so cheap is that nobody stays in there because it's apparently haunted by its original owner who built the house, a Captain Greg, who apparently had committed suicide. And she starts here, but she sticks to her guns, and she wants to stay there. The house is full of seafaring type material. The picture of the captain in the living room above the fireplace. There is a telescope in the master bedroom, and but she wants to be there, and she sort of makes a deal with him that if she spends a night, clean it up, and everything would be okay, and she'll take it, and she does eventually take it, but she does spend the night to start cleaning, because there was a charwoman, a cleaner that was there at some point, who apparently left very quickly food on the table and only got a little bit of cleaning done. Um, so she goes with a friend who's a cook. Martha is an old friend of hers. So they spend the night there, and she starts hearing in her head the voice of Captain Greg, and he's trying to push her out, doesn't want her there, but she's firm and wants to stay. And so it's like she doesn't see the ghost. So she eventually moves in with her children, and she makes a deal sort of with him that he doesn't scare the children and will only sort of speak to her, or mostly in the sort of bedroom area, in the bedroom, like and so he's going to be confined to the bedroom if she leaves the telescope in there, and then she eventually moves the portrait in of him as well, and they get on okay. They uh, she is quite, as I say, subservient. He, sees, like, he talks about her beauty and everything like this, and that she is a strong person, and sort of pushes her a little bit to do things. And he is wanted to have the house left, or the cottage left, for a seafaring for seafarers, like an old sailor's home. But he had died, and he says it wasn't suicide. He accidentally kicked on the gas in the bedroom, and it was raining heavily, so he closed the window, and so the inquest said, well, he never closes the window, so it had to have been suicide, but it wasn't. But he's sticking around, even so, and he like there's issues at times, like financial issues, but he's had some gold hidden on the property, so he says, you take that gold and buy the house, buy it outright, on the condition that she'll leave it to an old sailor's home. So she does this, and there are times when, like, her sister-in-law comes to visit. Her son really likes her, but the daughter Anne doesn't really care for her that much, and she and is always pushing her, trying to talk her into that it's not good for her to be all alone there in on the coast, and on it's basically overlooking the sea, and at wintertime it'd be really cold and windy, and she doesn't think she should be there. It's like she's always had Mrs. Muir has always had other people making decisions for her, and so she doesn't want this. But she is single, and Captain Gregg sort of prompts her and says, or pushes her a little bit and says, yeah, you should be with someone, and you'll fall for the first person that comes along. So he connives that there's somebody staying in a cottage nearby, and sort of works it so they meet, and he saves her little dog, and they sort of start a bit of a romance, uh, and but it turns out that he already is married, and the captain figures he's screwed up. He's learned a lesson, and he shouldn't do this, and it's hurt. She's quite hurt by this, that he is this way, that she was being taken advantage of. So the years go by, and there's more financial issues, and he says, well, let's, he'll dictate a book about his life, call it Blood and Swash, a sensational book about seafaring life. She says she can't write, but he says he'll dictate it, and so she does this. She pawns some jewelry to get a typewriter in order to do this, and then she eventually sells it to a publisher who is ecstatic about it, and it's published anonymously. And she's kept this secret even from her children and everything, but she's getting lots of money in. There's the rights to film eventually, that is talked about. So she's very well off from this book. And the years go by. She's content there doing gardening and everything. She cuts down a tree that he had planted, a monkey puzzle tree, that has lots of thorns in it, and it's called a monkey puzzle tree because monkeys can't climb it because of the thorns. Um, but she cuts it down and puts roses in, and he's not happy about this. But she tends her garden. Her children grow. She starts being more outspoken because there's still the pressure after her children sort of move away, go to college, and have lives that she shouldn't be there by herself. Her son is trying to push her this way as well. He's going into the clergy. He's marrying into a prominent clergyman's family and a rich family, and they're trying to push her out. They come live with him and his new wife. But she refuses to do this because she wants to be independent and do her own thing. And there's lots of interesting themes throughout this, but I'll get to those in a minute. But yeah, so she goes on. Her daughter becomes a famous dancer, but her brother doesn't want her to do this because it's a stage and it could hurt his career. He thinks that she should bow down and um, belay the her career in order for him because he's the man, sort of in that way. She doesn't. She dances under another name, but then she winds up marrying somebody else. But the children are all happy and everything. And as she getting older, Martha comes back um, to sort of look after her. They look after each other um, in their old age. And I just it's just and then when she dies, she then sees and she's with the captain, so it sort of is a real ghost, and it's pretty clear that it sort of is throughout too. But there was still the possibility that it was all in her mind. But she wrote the book with his help, and yeah, and the thing is that it's just the voice that she hears in her head, because when she's in places, she'll say things, or the captain will say things, scream at or shout at like the pawnbroker about her jewelry, and he's sort of taken aback because he hears her saying it and Mrs. Muir saying this. So it's pretty clear that his voice isn't outside, because obviously why would somebody think that it was her speaking when it was a man's voice? So therefore he's speaking through her voice. So there was still the possibility that even there, that it was all in her mind. But I think it is pretty clear that it's not, because she goes off after she dies. There's a nice little part at the end where just before she dies, she sort of says something mean to Martha, and the captain comes and says, "Don't do that. Call her back, and apologize for what you said." So she does that, because then she dies. So he didn't he didn't want her to say something like that bad to her, basically her lifelong friend, and then dying and never be able to take it back. So I thought that was pretty good. But it's also too the brother who is sort of it's written like he's writing it, or she's writing it with him as being the masculine sort of uh, stereotype, or not stereotype so much, but reality of how it's a man's world in a sense, and that her sister should not do something like this to harm him, and because she's a female, in a sense that she should give up her dream in order to have his dream. And that's the thing that even Mrs. Muir, and because she's been able to have her own dream, but the only way she's been able to have that is living there alone. Is alone. Is she has to give up the having a husband again, because if she did, she'd be bossed around by a man again, and because it was written in or published in 1945, it sort of fits in with the period where there was more emancipation for women who had worked it's set in England, so they had worked in the factories and everything like that while the war was going on, and then after that, that was all pulled back, and that's I think where this is sort of coming from, where women have been able to do things on their own without men, but then it's being taken back. And she's writing about this of one woman who will not be dictated to by men, and she'll do what she wants to do, her own life. So yeah, and then it was bought at that time in 1945 as well, by 20th Century Fox to make a film, and there were many directors pitched this, but Mankiewicz uh, won out to do this, and they it was Gene Tierney as Mrs. Muir. Rex Harrison plays Captain Gregg. Um, I've got let's see here. I just look at a few notes here. Edna Best is Martha. There's differences in the film because Martha is all the way through the film as her excuse me, as her cook and maid, and Edna Best was sort of pulled back out of into service in a sense by Mankiewicz, because she was a very prominent voice actor on the radio and producer of radio shows, but she came back to do this for Mankiewicz. And it's set during the same period. It's set in England. It's supposed to be in England anyway. We'll get to that in a moment. But it starts out with a beautiful matte shot. I first thought it might have been a partially hanging miniature, but it's a matte shot. But it's what's called a live matte shot of sort of the skyline of London at the turn of the century. But there's actually smoke coming out of the chimneys, so it's actually a painting, but with smoke coming out of chimneys in the painting, which was really interesting. And it was it took 3 months to film, but it was actually they actually the outside uh, sequences they filmed on location. There was two locations. They built a house, the Gull Cottage, on Palos Verde Peninsula in Southern California, and they actually built the house. So every time that they show the house, that was the outside. And then when they turned the camera the other way, showing out to the sea, that was actually 400 miles away, and Carmel by the Sea on the Monterey Peninsula. So, but it's done really well. Like, you really don't know. It's like that. You think it's all at the one location, but they're two different locations. And then obviously there's the back lot. Fox had a huge back lot at that time, 40-acre back lot. They lost it, or partly lost it. It was a Mankiewicz film as well, Cleopatra, that almost bankrupted 20th Century Fox, so they had to start selling off assets later. And but the other thing that's changed too is she only has one daughter, Anne, and no son. Cyril doesn't exist in the film. And Natalie Wood, a young Natalie Wood, plays the daughter Anne, and I think it was about like her fifth film. So she was like 9 years old when this was done, because she was born in 1938 and lived to 1981 until she was drowned, or she whatever happened. It's still up in the air. Philip Dunn wrote the screenplay from The Ghost of Mrs. Muir. He was a prominent film screenwriter of the time, and he wrote a lot of stuff. And also Joseph L. Mankiewicz was the director 1909 to 1993. He liked dialogue, and he usually fiddled with scripts, but the only time that he did any uh, changing with Dunn's script was for Miles Fairley, the sort of sleazy or lounge lizard, that she falls for, that's married, and he changed the dialogue and to make him more sleazy. And he was written, or he was the actor for Miles was George Saunders, who lived from 1906 to 1972. He committed suicide in 1972 in a hotel in late April, and he left a note that said, "Dear world, I am leaving because I am bored. I feel I have lived long enough, and I am leaving you with your worries in this sweet cesspool. Good luck." Uh, and that was in 1972. Uh, but he generally played these kind of things, and his memoir was called Memoirs of a Professional Cad, and that's what he played. Like, he stereotyped himself but he was very good at doing it. But apparently, he wasn't that type of person in real life. Um, and the cinematography is really, really good. It's by Charles Lang. He had 18 nominations. He's been apparently the most nominated cinematographer in Hollywood. He lived from 1902 to 1998. He worked mostly at Fox, but there's some excuse me, fabulous scenes in this. Like I say, the opening shot, but also too the lighting is really, really fantastic because uh, there's not to mention shadows, but there's lighting from the floor upwards, and then even in the daytime, there's always lighting coming from the floor somehow. And also too, 20th Century Fox style, when they're in rooms, would have windows and things like this where there'd be things happening on the wall, like maybe the light dancing on the walls and stuff like that. And that was a well, actually, no, he was borrowed for 20th Century Fox. That's right. Yeah, sorry. He was actually with another studio, so he had to learn their thing about the lighting on the walls and stuff like that. But he fit in, and he did this really well. And there's a fabulous scene where the ghost appears, and that's the thing. It's not a disembodied voice in her head in the film. It's actually like Rex Harrison is actually, materializes. And just before he does, she's walking downstairs to the kitchen with a candle, and that kind of walk down, the way the camera follows, the lighting, the shading is fabulous. um yeah, but we first see him in face, like she sees him in the kitchen, where it's sort of showing at the wall and it's completely black, and then he just sort of turns out of the blackness. But then at the same time, there's this fabulous, solid black silhouette shadow. He's a ghost. Why does he have a shadow? But that's the shadow, like that's the ghostly part, I think. Because prior to that, where he first appears, is where Mrs. Muir is sleeping on a chair, and he comes in front of the camera. Like, you see his back, but you don't see anything. All you see is blackness, complete black. There's no detail. It's just the outline of him, and it just looks fabulous. And as I say, the shadowing and everything like that, and then uh, like that's the big change there. And then she writes the book. There's no Gold that's doing this. She does all this. She writes the book within the first year that she's there. Uh, the in-laws come, and Captain Gregg sort of scares them away. She takes the manuscript to a publisher, and she has problems because they all think that, oh, she wrote a cookbook or a romance novel, or even at best a biography, possibly a romantic biography of Byron. And that sort of reflects the author too. I think that's why she wanted a masculine name for the book, rather than herself. But that's where she meets Miles, who writes, and here he writes children's books under the name Uncle Neddy or Naughty, Uncle Neddy or Uncle Naughty, one or the other. Um, and then it winds up he is married, and she finds this out. She thinks she's going to marry him, and before she finds out everything, The big change in the film is that Captain Greg is the ghost. He leaves her. He leaves her. He lets her get on with her life. And during that scene where he disappears, there's a dissolve of him, and it's not just a full dissolve. It's that he partially dissolves his body, and then you see part of the shoulder and the face. And apparently that was a very, very technical thing to do at the time. They didn't have computers and Photoshop to do this, but it looks really good, and it looks really, really fabulous on the screen. So yeah, so this happens in a year for this, and she gets the money, but everybody knows that she wrote this book, and he sort of while she's sleeping tells her that it was her idea of the book. She dreamt it, and so she doesn't remember. She just sort of dreamt about a ghost and then wrote the book. And then her daughter grows up, comes back, says she's getting married, and then it just quickly goes. The last like 10-15 minutes are when she gets older, and then she dies. Like, she talks about a grandchild by her daughter, and then she dies, and then he comes back, and she's dead in the chair, but she's the young Tierney again, and they open the door and walk off into heaven. It's not the best ending. They rushed it there, but it's the usual that they do rush. Uh, uh, they rush the the uh, the story. Like, they telescope it. They take stuff out, and it works even so. Like, it works as a film, and it's good, but it is I think very rushed at the end, the way they did this, and they take out that whole part of her sort of growing, and they made it look like in the film that she's been sort of jilted in a sense by him, or taken advantage by him, by this Miles, and that's why she never married again. It's sort of like that in the book, but she's got the companionship of the captain, and she realizes that she doesn't want anything else. She wants to be alone. She wants to do things her way. She likes it there. She likes the way she is there. And in the film, they turned it a little bit on the side of her, being sad and lonely. And I don't think that's the way it should be. At least, well, not in the book. But there's a few other things that are interesting. Jean Tierney, the actress, she lived from 1920 to 1991, and she did a lot of films. But she prior, about 4 weeks before, a few weeks before filming, filming started, she fell down some stairs and broke her foot, or broke a bone in her foot. So she was in a cast. So they spent the first half, like, filming everything while she was in a cast, either standing or sitting. And then she apparently, against the advice of her doctor, she took the cast off, and then they did the walking bits, the second half of it. And it's and apparently she was in a lot of pain, but and it might account for the way she actually walks in there. There is it is noted how she walks, but also too, just in her personal life, she sort of had, I guess, depression as she got older. Uh, at the time of the filming, she had a 4-year-old daughter. While she was pregnant, she contracted rubella, German measles, and um, her daughter was born with, like, I think partially blind, couldn't hear, mentally deficient, um, and she blamed herself for this. Now, she says later on in life she met somebody who had said that they met earlier in life. It was a big fan of hers earlier, and it was while she was pregnant, and the woman had said to her, I had German measles, but I still had to see you. just, if that's a true story, that is just horrible. Um, Rex Harrison, he wasn't as the big actor yet. I think at this time, and he lived from 1908 to 1990. It wasn't really until uh, my Fair Lady that came along that he really sort of made it big. But he was making a lot of films in England as well prior to that. But anyway, it's a very good film. I hadn't seen it in so long, and I was really pleased to read the book. The only thing I didn't really care too much for the sort of love affair, the romance part between the Miles. Um, I can understand why she has it in there, but I didn't really care for it too much, and I didn't really care for it in the film. In the film, they made her more having more gumption, like she was more in control of herself and for what she wants, and more outspoken. That's the word, more outspoken than she was in the book. She was a bit meek in the book. And she didn't really get to that point until quite later with the help of Captain Gregg in the book. So as I watched this film with Brandy at the Book Eclectic, we read the book, and we each watched it, and we were sort of on Skype and you know talking about scenes and stuff, and it was really weird because regardless of how we would synchronize it, one of us would become faster than the other and the thing. But anyway, like Brandy was saying that if she actually was the way she was in in the film, I don't think she would have fallen for Miles, because she would have seen right through him, seen the sleaziness, the lounge lizard, the snakiness of him, and would have just walked by him. But that's Hollywood, and everything. But yeah, it is a really good film. It's one of the few there's a lot of ghost films that have been made, but there's not too many that actually have a real ghost. And this one does, and it's just you just, if you watch Rex Harrison as well, at times it just seems like he's just enjoying this part and in his dialogue so much that he's ready to just burst out with energy or laughter. And one other thing was that they didn't want him to have a beard, because he's got a beard and he's got a thin beard that comes down, and he purposely wanted to have a beard because it was a sea captain. So they worked it out the best way, and apparently the beard was put on like one hair or one thing at a time, so that would have taken a while. And apparently, like with her, Jean Tierney's old age makeup took about 4 hours to put on her hands and her face, but it doesn't really work because she still looks good. She's supposed to be like 80 years old, possibly, and she just does not look like it. But no, it's a fabulous film. If you haven't seen it, I would say, and you like old films, classic films, it is a gem. Simple as that. It's a gem. And next week will be the Oxbow incident for June on the Range. I'll see you next time, BookTube.